This program is presented by the Fromm Institute for Lifelong Learning at the University of San Francisco. The Fromm Institute, keeping up with the times no matter when.
Here we have a map of the Roman Empire at its height. Oha, you say. Oha. Yes, because we're going to take a step back in order to take the next steps forward. Now you can see that the Roman Empire at its height, this is approximately 200 CE, 200 AD, is really quite enormous. It has, again, they're now in Britain. Again, the parts of the German regions, Austria, Switzerland, what eventually becomes these different countries. Of course, there's France, the Iberian Peninsula, North Africa, Italy, naturally, again, the Balkan regions, areas what we today call Turkey, and then this Levant region. Again, the Greeks called this Palestine. Again, that's actually where the name comes from. They called this Palestine and then Egypt as well. A huge area, and also connected by a huge network of roads and shipping lanes, which is the only time in world history that this entire Mediterranean region was connected. In other words, that there was one government over this entire region. That creates a certain unity of culture and a very, very fast possibilities of being able to move very quickly across this vast region. Again, it's one of the great world empires, naturally, and the center of this great world empire, of course, was the city of Rome. This is a model of the city of Rome in the city of Rome today. Ancient model, it's a huge model. And we estimate that by this time, about the 200s AD, the city of Rome has anywhere between 1.5 to 2 million people crammed within the walls of this very great metropolitan area. It also had enormous monuments. For those of you who have been to Rome, you can still see remnants of these, what were obviously amazing buildings. Again, absolutely amazing and fantastic buildings. Okay. So we spool ahead to Mr. Diocletian. Diocletian is emperor around about 300 AD. There have been some problems. And so Diocletian comes to the conclusion that the empire is too large for one man to rule. And so, being Roman, he's actually part Roman, part Greek. He decides on a very practical solution, which is to divide the empire into half, and each half into half again. In other words, 2 co-emperors, and then each of those half sections is divided into halves once again. This became ultimately known as the Tetrarchy, meaning the rule of 4. Although the 4 are not equal, the primary of the 4 is Diocletian himself. And so we have the development of what becomes known as the Western Roman Empire and the Eastern Roman Empire. Obviously, it's still one unit, but it now has a much more efficient system of administration, of governance. It actually makes it easier for the government to kind of administer. Again, this very, very vast, very, very populous, very, very highly urbanized region. So Diocletian is one of 4. He's the head of 4. So technically, he has his choice. Which of the 4 is he going to take? What color would you choose? Orange, yellow, light blue, or dark blue? He takes the dark blue sections. Yes, he does. And it's not just because he loves blue. No. The irony is actually he comes from here. He's actually a Dalmatian. You couldn't tell in the black and white picture that he's white with little black spots all over him, okay? But he is a Dalmatian. All right, he's from this Illyrian coast. So you would think, well, he would choose this area because it's got Rome and it's got home, but he doesn't. He chooses this area right here. Why? Because this is the whole reason the Romans moved into this area in the first place, is because this area is enormously rich. Enormously rich. It's what brought the Romans. The Romans knew where the money was, and they usually found ways to get that. Okay, at any rate. So for example, these areas right here, what we today call Western Turkey, this area right here, as you see, was called Asia. This is where Asia originally starts. Just as a little sidelight, as the Greeks go further east, they keep taking the name Asia, Asia, Asia with them, and ultimately it goes all the way to Japan, right? But initially, this is the Asian regions, and again, Asia was very, very rich. Lots of gold, silver, great mining activities, industry for that time, of course, very agriculturally rich as well. And then so is Egypt. Egypt, again, was always synonymous with abundance. Again, a very, very wealthy region, tremendous food production here as well. One of the other reasons why Diocletian moves to this wealthy area is because it is constantly under attack from the east. Because the next major empire to the east is the Persians. And the Persians come in many different manifestations. There are typically, the rise and fall of dynasties. Again, the rise and fall of dynasties, and the dynasty of choice for today is the Sassanid dynasty. Again, it's the new incarnation of the Persian Empire. It is often considered to be the high point of ancient Persian civilization. So, again, he moves to the east because this is the area that is most important to protect. Again, it's a very, very wealthy region of the Roman Empire. So again, he moves to the east, and that brings us to the next great emperor, Constantine. Constantine rules around 320 AD approximately, and he decides to build a new capital city. Now, in all of these cultures, in all of these human civilizations, the capital is where the emperor is. This is why you can have many different cities. This is why you can technically have many different capital cities, because the capital is wherever the emperor is, and Constantine decides to move. He wants to build a capital city that is much, much closer to, again, all of this action here. And so he chooses, again, he is part Greek himself. Again, one of the great ironies is that the last Roman emperors are primarily Greek, which means that the Greek qualities of this huge civilization are coming to the forefront once again. So he decides for this site right here. Here is an old Greek city which has fallen into ruin, at least as far as I can remember. It's I was there. Sorry, but it's it's a little dim now. But again, it had fallen into ruin, and the name of it was Byzantion. Again, the city of Byzantion. As you can see, it's a very ideal location, because take a look at this. It is, of course, astride a major trade route, east to west, but it's also astride a major water route, north to south. You see, again, it's a perfect location for a city. And so indeed, he does build this city, and it becomes known after him, Constantinopolis, which means the city of Constantine. In Latin, it becomes Constantinopoli, and we've turned it into Constantinople. Okay, but anyway, again, it's all the same city. It is located where the Bosporus, which is here, again, the water straits that connect the Black Sea with the Sea of Marmara and then onto the Mediterranean. So the Bosporus was right here, and then an inlet of the Bosporus, which is called the Golden Horn. And just as a complete sidelight, because I really do like tangents, and we're going on an enormously tiny but enormous tangent. One of the men who was here in the Golden Horn in Constantinople in the early 1800s was a man by the name of John Fremont. And when he came to California and sailed through the straits here, he said, "Why, this reminds me of the Golden Horn, except it's a gate, so I'm going to call it the Golden Gate." So here we have our connections with Constantinople. We're feeling really good about ourselves now. Yes, we are. Okay. At any rate, so he builds this great city, Constantinopolis, and it becomes the second major capital. In other words, you now have two sections of this empire, and it has two capitals. Again, co-capitals, Rome here in the west, and Constantinopolis, the city of Constantine, in the east. Then there are, I'm spooling forward. This is one of the fun things about being a historian. You can play with time. So we're going to spool. We're going to spool, okay? And unfortunately, my students don't get it anymore because they've never had a tape recorder, they've never had a cassette player, they've never had a, one of those 8-track things. You go, and they're wondering, okay, what's wrong with him? It's so sad, The irony is you have these kind of culture clashes. I refer to movies that my students have never seen. Why? Because they just turned 18, and any movie we're seeing is at least an R rating, right? Yes, right. Right. Okay. Good. Okay. I'm just sorry. Okay. At any rate, so we have again. We spool forward 2 generations: peace, prosperity, happiness, and then we hear. Did you hear the huge crash? It's the fall of the Roman Empire. Okay. At any rate, okay. The fall of the Roman Empire. It's very, very messy. And it takes about 100 years. I'm sure that most of you probably did never realize this, but it takes about 100 years for the empire to crash. In other words, it's a horrendous, horrendous time. Some historians, for example, point out that towards the end of this period, approximately 470 AD, that there was no one alive who could remember a time without collapse and war. I mean, can you imagine that? I mean, it's just absolutely, absolutely horrendous, again, this fall of the Roman Empire. There are great invasions. It starts with the invasion of the Huns, then the invasion of Germanic tribes, migrations of enormous numbers of people. The irony is the Germanic people did not want to destroy the Roman Empire. The Germanic people actually moved into the empire for safety. But in their attempts, in these large numbers of people moving in, again, this migration of the peoples, the Roman structure simply collapsed. I mean, they simply could not take this anymore. And so we have this enormous chaos. A horrendous collapse. Countless cities are destroyed, are abandoned, and millions of people die. Many of them are killed, and the rest die either of plague, of epidemics, or of starvation. Again, just tremendous, tremendous catastrophe. Again, the fall of the Roman Empire. Notice, if you look at this map, that this very common title is actually very misleading. Do you see? It isn't really the fall of the Roman Empire. It's the fall of the Roman Empire West. You see, it's the western part of the empire that collapses, and it collapses completely. Seriously, a dark age, and it is a dark age, falls upon this part of the world. Again, it's only the western part that collapses. And in the ruins of the West, Germanic groups working with Roman remnants begin to establish a number of kingdoms, such as the kingdom of the Franks, the kingdom of the Visigoths, the kingdom of the Suebi, the kingdom of the Vandals, etc., etc. These are extremely unstable kingdoms. They rise, they fall, and all those little nice dark lines that are supposed to be borders, those are just the imagination of a historian who needs to know where to stop coloring in the purple and the orange. Okay. So, the reason why this is also very misleading is that you can see that the eastern section of the Roman Empire maintains. And this is very important. First off, notice that the Diocletian line of separation between east and west stays, it holds. Isn't that ironic? Because you see what happened is when Diocletian and his successors and Constantine and his successors moved to the east, the whole gravity of the empire shifted to the east as well. And they were able to save the east. They were not able to save the west. Again, Diocletian's line, ironically enough, holds. And the Eastern Roman Empire continues for approximately 1,000 more years. So for the East, they're only halfway through the story. Okay. At any rate, by the end of this period, again, this collapsing period, about 500 AD, there's an enormous difference between East and West. And again, the reason why I'm going through this is because it becomes very relevant in about 20 minutes. At any rate, so the common culture, the common culture of this Roman Empire is completely broken apart. The East survives intact. The West is completely shattered, and shattered is a very appropriate word. In the East, the imperial court, the imperial administration, strong central authority remain. In the West, there is no imperial authority. There is no central authority. There is just regional, small regional power centers. This disintegration continues. In other words, over the next 5 centuries, life for 5 centuries worth of generations is very, very exciting because stability remains elusive in the West. In the East, the city life continues to flourish. In the West, very few cities survive. Most cities are abandoned, and a more local agricultural economy begins to develop. In the East, the Roman institutions continue, but in the East is the Greek Hellenistic culture, and it becomes stronger and stronger and stronger. So that, for example, by approximately 520, the official language of the Eastern Roman Empire is no longer Latin. They change it to Greek, and they call themselves Romaioi, which is Roman in Greek. Isn't that great? Okay. The West, on the other hand, is dominated by these Germanic cultures, Germanic cultures and Celtic cultures, and they transform the Western Roman Empire as well. In other words, that the division between these two sections becomes more and more marked as the Germanic Celtic areas here become ever more prominent, and the Greek element here becomes ever more prominent. Yes, and then we come to Mr. Justinian. Now you will see that in the East, the city of Constantinople remains the capital, of course. And you will also see on your handout that this Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantium as it is known, continues Roman traditions and administration and law, but becomes prominently Hellenistic, that is Greek in culture, and of course it's blended together by Christian beliefs. So for example, the Eastern Roman emperors traced their roots back through Constantine all the way to Octavian Augustus. The Constantinople Senate traces its roots all the way back to the Senate of Rome from approximately 600 BC. That's already 1,000 years of an institution, essentially. The Byzantine army is a continuation of the Roman legions. And even the racing teams of Rome continue in Constantinople as well, in the Hippodrome of Constantinople. So with Justinian, right here, this is actually a book cover. It's from Constantinople. It is from Justinian's time, and Justinian, we believe, is portrayed on it. Emperor Justinian is the first very powerful emperor of the East who tries to bring the western parts of the empire back under his control. It's only temporary, and it doesn't last. But, again, Constantinople is the major city here, and Constantinople continues to grow. Now, one cannot overemphasize the role of this city in the East. Because, as I always like to tell my students, wealth attracts, and it always attracts the wrong people. And so the East is very, very wealthy, and it's attracting a lot of people, some of whom, of course, are Persians, as well as others. And so the Eastern Roman Empire is attacked many, many, many times in this very, very long continuing history. And the attackers always aim for Constantinople. And Constantinople always fights them off. This, again, is a very, very remarkable city. Here again, you'll see a reconstruction of the city. Notice again the Golden Horn, the Bosporus, the Sea of Marmara, and you'll see these tremendous walls, these enormous walls around the city. Again, a reconstruction of the downtown area, which is like in San Francisco, right by the water. This is an enormous hippodrome. Again, it's a racing course, again, for the chariot races. It's essentially, like the football of the time. Then we have the enormous palace compound, and again, these great, magnificent avenues, these great boulevards as well. Here again, an overview of this enormous and very, very powerful city. You will see that there are two sets of walls. The first built by Constantine, the second built later, a century later, by the great emperor Theodosius. And this is what they look like. Now, this is actually very significant. This is one of the reasons why this city could never be taken. It not only had a moat, a shore, a river, a Bosporus, for example, but it had this very, very sophisticated series of walls. Over 96 towers which fortified the walls of the city. But notice also in this sketch that, well, that doesn't look like city, does it? What does that look like? What does this look like right here? Farms. In other words, the walls enclose farms. Why is that significant? Because if the city is laid siege to, which always happened, people could continue to grow food. This, of course, ultimately is very important. There are, again, the walls had moats in front of them. They had walls in front of the moats. Again, just an amazing system. Some small remnants still exist in Constantinople today. And then also in Constantinople, this. What is this? It looks like a beautiful palace with a really, really shiny floor. Well, that really shiny floor is water. This is an underground reservoir, one of several hundred in the city. I mean, you have to think about this, right? There are over 3 million cubic feet of water in this one reservoir alone, and over 300 columns about 3 stories high. It's just one of the many, many underground water reservoirs that the city of Constantinople had. Again, for the logical reason is, if the city is under attack, you still have water. These two reasons, food and water, are why this city, again with its enormous walls, could never be taken. Again, this proves to be very relevant for the rest of this course, off and on. This is why, again, I mention it again, the city of Constantinople. Now, in this post-fall of the Western Roman Empire world, I wanted to highlight 2, I think, maybe it's 3, no, it's 2, it's 2 buildings, okay. The first is, for several more centuries, the Byzantines, that is the Eastern Romans, were able to maintain control over Italy, or at least parts of Italy. One of the Roman capitals had been the city of Ravenna. And so this is where the Byzantine Empire establishes its western headquarters. And in the city of Ravenna, Justinian has built. We always say Justinian built. Well, actually, he didn't. He didn't lay the bricks. Trust me. All right. But he had built a very famous church by the name of San Vitale. Some of you may be familiar with this. Some of you have been to Italy, been to Ravenna. This is one of the great highlights. It is today not particularly attractive because it's been through hell. But it's significant because you see it's what shape? It's an octagon shape. That is, it's an 8-sided building. Again, I'm basically laying stones here for what is to come. At any rate, it's an 8-sided building, an octagon building, which was very popular in the Eastern Roman Empire at this time. Many churches were built in an 8-sided fashion. And then, in Constantinople itself, Justinian also builds an enormous cathedral. When Emperor Constantine, well, I'm like total tangent. It's really not a tangent. Trust me, it's not a tangent. Okay. Anyway, when Constantine built this city, Constantinople, and he built it in 6 years, which shows the tremendous power, organizational power of the Romans. When Constantine built the city of Constantinople, it was different from Rome in that there were no pagan temples. There were only Christian churches. There were no gladiator fights. And many buildings in Rome were dismantled and brought to Constantinople and rebuilt there. So, one of the other things that was transplanted from Rome was the feisty attitude in sports. Because Rome had 4 different racing teams. This is equivalent, I'm sure that many of you will now relate, this is equivalent to having 4 football teams in the same city. So imagine if here in San Francisco we had the 49ers, the Raiders, the Green Bay Packers, and anybody else? What's your favorite team to hate? Oh, of course, Tom Brady, right, exactly. So the Patriots, exactly, very good. All right. So suppose you had 4 football teams in the city. Whenever they play, what is the logical result? Riots, exactly. That's the whole fun of going to the game is you get to have a riot afterwards and vent your frustrations. Exactly, very good. And so one day while Justinian is emperor, there's a sports riot, which turns into a political riot, which turns into a religious riot. That's like the worst of all, right? 3 different reasons to burn buildings. And so in the process of this, fires are set, part of the palace burns down, and the great cathedral burns down as well. This is known as, it's a very sophisticated technical term in history, it's called, oops, didn't mean to do that. And so Justinian has a new cathedral built. It is this very famous building, the Church of Holy Wisdom, again in Constantinople. It was for many centuries the largest church in the world. Actually, it was for many centuries the largest building in the world. An enormous engineering accomplishment, no internal supports. No internal supports. It is, I think, the equivalent of a 30-story building inside. It's an enormous structure, and it only took them 5 years to build. I mean, this is absolutely mind-boggling. Again, it took them 5 years to build. It has, of course, great mosaics, because this too was one of the great art forms that the Romans took from the Greeks and then developed, like they did so many other things. Again, these wonderful mosaics. Again, the Church of Holy Wisdom, Hagia Sophia, in Constantinople. The Eastern Roman Empire did not just inherit a great deal from the West, it also inherited the enemies of the Roman Empire. Again, most specifically, the Persians. So just as the Greeks had, for many generations, fought off the Persians, this is, for example, the context for Alexander the Great. His invasion of the Persian Empire is primarily motivated by revenge and ambition. But again, this long-standing conflict between the Greeks and the Persians, the Romans inherited, and now this Eastern Roman Empire also inherits the great animosities of the Persian Empire, now in its newest manifestation, the Sassanid Empire. As I mentioned to you before, the Sassanids, historians consider this dynasty, this long-lived dynasty, to be the zenith of Persian culture and of Persian civilization. Again, this is very, very important, just again for our purposes to remember. One of its great capitals is along the Tigris River, and it's called Ctesiphon. Actually, we pronounce it Ctesiphon. It was originally pronounced Ctesiphon. Again, an enormous city, great, powerful central city, and there is just a remnant here of this enormous hall that was part of the royal palaces. Again, you can just get an impression of this enormous building and how very, very sophisticated. Again, this is just a small part of the palace of the Sassanid emperors at this time. And also, again, just looking a couple sessions down the road while I'm here, is I wanted to give you just a couple examples of this Sassanid art. For example, a beautiful gold inlaid plate, which shows one of the most powerful of these Sassanid emperors. He dies in 570, the same year that Muhammad is born. Or, again, notice this is glass and inlay. Again, this is also Sassanid. A love of poetry and literature, very important in this culture. And what we would call a griffin, again, a very, very typical symbol for the Sassanid dynasty, that is a combination eagle and lion, exactly, combination eagle and lion. Once again, a griffin in silk, again, very, very beautiful piece, and a very beautiful horse's head. Again, just to give you an idea of this Sassanid culture. Again, very sophisticated, very, very sophisticated. And these two empires, the Eastern Roman Empire and the Sassanids, often at war, and yet they influence each other culturally as well. This is always the case, and it happens here as well. And so, once again, here is a great historical irony, and that is the year that Muhammad is born. Well, actually, we don't know what year he was born, but approximately 570 AD, the time period in which Muhammad is born, these two empires go to war yet again. Apparently, they're bored, and this is entertainment, and so here they go. All right. So the Byzantines invade deep. Oh, yes, one other thing I wanted to mention is you can see here, this is actually nicely done as far as the coloring is concerned. You've got the Eastern Roman Empire here. You've got the Sassanids here. So where are the points of greatest contention? The greatest contentions are Armenia, which is technically a part of this Persian world, but is Christian. That's important. Then the Palestine regions, the Levant regions, again, as they were known, Palestine regions as they were known, but most especially this area right here. This area which we today, anybody recognizes this area today is called Iraq. Exactly, it's called Iraq. Again, as I mentioned to you before, when we see pictures of Iraq today, especially along the rivers, it looks so bleak. It was enormously fertile. Enormously fertile, and this is why, again, it was so important. So again, these two empires, like the Romans and the Parthians before them, fight over these areas. Once again, the Byzantines invade deep into these regions. Once again, the Sassanids drive them out, and then the Sassanids go on the offensive. The Sassanids take over this Levant region. They take over Egypt, and they even attack the city of Constantinople. And do they capture the city of Constantinople? No, because of the walls, the water, and the food, exactly. But for a brief moment, for less than 10 years, this is the realm of the Sassanids. Do you see? They've taken over these parts of the Eastern Roman Empire. Now, it looks like the Sassanids are on the ascendancy, but actually they are completely worn out. Enormous numbers of people have died. They've completely, exhausted their resources and their treasuries. And so the Eastern Roman Empire, which looks like it's collapsing, once again goes on the offensive. And it drives them out of Egypt. It drives them out of the Levant, drives them back into these Mesopotamian regions. In other words, the time period in which Muhammad is beginning to have his prophecies, is beginning to have his revelations. These two empires have beat each other to a pulp. They are both completely financially exhausted. Their militaries are in disarray. And both countries are crumbling. In the Sassanid regions, a young boy becomes king. That's like the worst possibility right there. Because he has advisors, he cannot control his kingdom anymore, and it begins to fragment into many, many, many different smaller kingdoms. It's a horrible, horrible time for both of these countries, and it's just worth keeping in mind. Significance is when Muhammad dies, these two kingdoms are exhausted militarily, financially, economically, politically. And you can also imagine, by the way, what joy it must have been to live here with these wash of armies coming across, again, trying to get these very fertile areas. Okay, so we go back to Arabia. Once upon a time, true story. Okay, once upon a time, there was a little boy, and he loved camels. Baby camels, actually. He loved to play with the little baby camels. I mean, seriously, how can you not love that face, right? Oh, right, okay. Again, he loved to play with these little baby camels, and so he got a nickname. He got the nickname Camel Daddy, because he was like a little daddy to the little camel foals. Do you know what the problem is with a nickname? I can see some people are talking from experience here. Yes, it sticks. And so here's the irony, is that even when you're older and maturer, and you're a very wealthy man, and you're the head of your clan, and you're esteemed, and you're honored, and people are still calling you Camel Daddy. I suppose it's the measure of a man who has a sense of humor and a sense of humility, that he graciously accepts what cannot be changed. And so we don't know him by his real name. We know him by the name Abu Bakr, which means father of the little camels, or camel daddy. Exactly. Very good. All right. Now, Abu Bakr was born to a very wealthy family in Mecca. So that means it was obviously a merchant family. Remember that Mecca has two identities. One is it's a sacred, holy, ancient city, and the other is it's a very prominent, wealthy economic center, and has some very, very wealthy families in it. Again, what was very typical, of course, for these wealthy families is they would send their little boys out to the Blue Angels. Exactly. All right. All right. It's Superman. It's Superman. No, I'm sorry. Okay. So they would send their little boys out to the Bedouins to do what? Toughen them up. Exactly. And this is where little Abu Bakr fell in love with the camels. He followed the family traditions, a cloth merchant. He traveled, again, like many of these merchants, he was very literate. He traveled extensively. He became very wealthy. He became, again, the chief of his clan. And he loved poetry. He had a tremendous memory. He knew, for example, the genealogy. This is no easy feat, especially since Arabic names often are very, very complicated. He knew the genealogy of many of the Arab tribes. He knew their stories. He knew their traditions. And again, a man of great character. He eventually became known as the truthful one. Again, Abu Bakr al-Siddiq. Abu Bakr is also particularly significant because besides the fact that he was rich and a sheikh and a lover of small camels, he was also the first man to submit to the one true God, who was not a part of Muhammad's family. So he's the first Muslim that is not a part of Muhammad's family. His children, of course, accepted Islam, peace. One of his wives did, the other didn't. And so he divorced her. Okay. Again, he was a man who was very, very wealthy and became ever more wealthy through he had a tremendous knack as a merchant, a tremendous knack as a businessman. So he became more and more wealthy, and he used his wealth for the benefit of the Muslim community. For example, he would make sure that the poor were properly fed and clothed. He tried to protect them as much as he could. And on occasion, we have records from this, documents, he would buy slaves who had converted to Islam in order to set them free. Again, a man of great magnanimity, a man again of great generosity. He obviously was a very, very good friend of Muhammad. And as their friendship grew, he became an ever more important advisor to Muhammad. And so eventually, this friendship, this alliance was sealed. And it was sealed with a marriage. Exactly, very good. In other words, Abu Bakr married his daughter to Muhammad. Abu Bakr's daughter, Aisha, is 6 years old, and Muhammad is a tender 53. Okay. It is said that their marriage was consummated when she was 10. Okay. At any rate, this, by the way, it's hard to know to what degree this is historically accurate, because there's another subtext here. And what is the subtext? That she's a virgin. Do you see? And so if you spool down to 6 years old, it's pretty guaranteed, yes. Okay, at any rate. And so this means that Abu Bakr is not only Muhammad's closest friend, his best advisor, but is now his father-in-law, even though Abu Bakr is actually 3 years younger than Muhammad, but nevertheless he's now the father-in-law as well. And so Abu Bakr becomes, again, a very faithful advisor and a very faithful supporter of Muhammad. Abu Bakr, for example, is one of the last to leave Mecca as they are becoming persecuted. And he too, like Muhammad, hid in a cave for 3 days as the Meccan armies were trying to hunt them down. Now, last week we talked about Ali, again, the young man who grew up in Muhammad's household, who served Muhammad very, very well as a warrior, and who had then married Muhammad's daughter Fatima. Again, she's the daughter of Khadija. Again, who had married Muhammad's daughter Fatima. And again, he had participated in all of these major wars, even many of the minor skirmishes as well. Abu Bakr, too, had participated in a number of these wars. And once again, the traditions vary. Some say that Abu Bakr was a very courageous warrior. Others say, well, he wasn't that courageous, not compared to Ali. But you have to keep in mind, of course, that Abu Bakr is already a middle-aged man. I mean, there are certain kind of limitations. We're all discovering, certain kind of limitations in our age. It's, as they say, old age, it's not as glamorous as they make it out to be. Okay, at any rate. So significantly, the year before Muhammad's death, Muhammad sends Abu Bakr with 300 pilgrims to Mecca and to show the proper rites, in other words, to bring back the proper rites of the pilgrimage, which we talked about last week. What is significant is that there are certain injunctions, certain directives, which are now read by Abu Bakr to the pilgrims. For example, first, from now on, no non-Muslims are allowed into Mecca. And how long does that remain? Until today. Exactly, very good. Also, no running naked around the Kaaba. Okay. They don't do that today either, but they clearly were doing it in those days. So no naked people running around. And Muslim, that is Islam, the religion of peace is a religion for the entire Arabian world. In 632, the year that Muhammad dies, Muhammad makes what turns out to be his last pilgrimage to Mecca. Again, he makes his famous speech on He makes his famous speech on Mount Arafat. All Muslims are brothers. Do not take from any Muslim what is not freely given. In other words, no stealing from each other. And then you recall Muhammad returns to Medina from Mecca with Ali. And remember, he says to Ali, he says to the other pilgrims, as close as I am to you, Ali is even closer. Again, to some, it indicates that Muhammad has chosen his successor. That is, Ali, the man that has been with him since he was a little boy. Upon their return, thank you very much, Carla. Upon the return to Medina, Muhammad gets weaker and weaker, more and more ill. And so Muhammad designates Abu Bakr to lead the 5-time daily prayers. Well, clearly many took this to show that Abu Bakr had been selected as a possible successor. Oh, this is so complicated. So very complicated. Because you see, both of them are intricately connected with Muhammad. Both have been there for a very long time, and both have, logically, great prestige and a great following. And then, as you recall, Muhammad dies. To the shock and horror, Muhammad dies, completely unexpectedly, and there is great confusion and great chaos. Umar, again, one of the closest advisors, says, Muhammad is not dead. Muhammad has gone away for 40 days and he will return. But it is Abu Bakr, who brings calm back, because he says, know that whoever believes in Muhammad, Muhammad is dead. Whoever believes in God, know that God is alive and never dies. Again, he does stem the panic, but now the question is, again, as you recall, who is going to be the successor? Who is going to be the caliph? Caliph means successor. Caliph means successor. But the problem is that the unity of the Arabian world, the unity of the Muslims, was established on Muhammad. And with Muhammad dead, it all begins to splinter. For example, the tribes in Medina itself that had been at each other's throats. Now tensions escalate once again. Furthermore, nobody had even really noticed this before, but it now suddenly comes to the fore as well. That is, the people who lived in Medina originally, and all those Meccans who had come to Medina, are two different kinds of people, different kinds of ideas. In other words, tensions now begin to break out between these two as well. And so the leaders of the people of Medina, the Ansari, decide that they're going to select the new successor. But Abu Bakr and Umar intervene and say, no, wait. We're going to select the new leader. Oh, that's awkward as well. And so here we have, again, the strangely large type of the possible positions. Exactly, very good. All right, things happen. At any rate, the two possibilities, again, they're on your handout. On the one hand, a kinsman, a member of the family should succeed, and that, of course, would be Ali. Ali, because he is married to Muhammad's daughter, and he has children. You see, in other words, a hereditary, essentially monarchic succession. These people, and again, it isn't just Ali's family. There are many people who love Ali. There are many people who really honor Ali. They want him to become the next successor, the next caliph. They eventually become what we call the Shia. And it's really easy to remember because Shia ends in A like Ali. Okay? It's really easy to remember. Shia ends in A like Ali because they're for Ali. But again, there's another whole group of people, many of the Meccans who have come to Medina, who say, no. Muhammad said, we're all brothers. And so therefore, the person who should lead us is the man who was closest to Muhammad, the men who were closest to Muhammad, the men who are the wisest and the most faith-filled. And they are Abu Bakr, Umar, and Uthman, again, in order, the three most important advisors and friends of Muhammad, right here. These become known as the Sunni because they emphasize the traditions that Muhammad had established. So here we have four major contenders. This is actually very awkward. And so, once again, you remember that it is Umar who convinces virtually everyone involved, convinces everyone that Abu Bakr, the oldest of the advisors, should be the next caliph. Ali is conspicuously absent. And you remember from last week, he's absent because he and his wife and his children are preparing the body of Muhammad. They're washing it and preparing it for burial. And when they discover that Ali has been passed over and that Abu Bakr is going to be the new caliph, remember what Ali says? He says, we haven't even yet buried Muhammad, and you are already fighting over succession. But important is, can Ali be convinced to accept Abu Bakr? And so once again, just to pick this theme up because it plays to be very, very important, is that Umar and a number of men come to Fatima's house, Ali's wife. And here again, the stories diverge. In the Sunni tradition, Umar is very, very deferential to Fatima. He says, I love you more than I love my daughters. And she then tries to encourage Ali to accept Abu Bakr. But in the Shia tradition, there are several different stories. The first is that Umar and his men come to the house of Fatima and they threaten to burn it down with the family inside. Or that Umar and his men force open the door and the door smashes against Fatima, pushes her against the wall, and she, pregnant, is crushed, with the result that several ribs are broken. She has a miscarriage, and ultimately, through these injuries, she dies. This, again, is very significant. Ali later says, if I had had 40 men in my house, I would not have agreed. In other words, here we have it. the origins of the split that occurs. Now, let me just make this one comment. We all know how this happens. Initially, the altercation is between who will be the caliph, who will be the successor. And then suddenly there's this little event, around Fatima, right? I mean, that's really, really strange. So, the stories begin to spread. Well, they threatened to burn her down in her house, or they injured her, or they killed her. Do you see what has happened? It's no longer just an academic debate about who's going to be the successor. Now there is violence involved. And those rumors, they fester and they fester and they fester. Now, keep in mind, I always mention this. In this kind of discord, every generation finds new reasons to revive old hatreds. So, for example, last week, the stampede in Mecca, where over 700 people are killed, right? The majority of the people killed were Shia Iranians. So you know what's going to happen, right? The Ayatollah of Iran, a Shia, sent an irate message to Saudi Arabia, Sunni, about how Saudi Arabia is completely negligent in protecting its pilgrims. It's the 407 millionth insult that needs to be remedied. In other words, the hatred just goes on and on and on and on. And now you're completely exhausted, and so let's take a 10-minute break. Okay, very good, thank you. Again, she has many different epithets, many different names and titles. The Shining One, the Pure One, the Eternal Weeper. Actually, this is particularly in the Shia traditions. It probably doesn't make so much sense just yet, but it's believed that she weeps eternally for her father, then for her husband, and then for her sons. And the Shia believe that if you cry with her, that she finds relief in that. In other words, that you can take some of the grief away from her if you cry with her as well. And she is often also called the judge of the hereafter. In other words, she takes on a connotation very similar. I don't want to say actually too similar, but again, very similar to, so for example, the Virgin Mary in the Catholic traditions. Again, very, very powerful influence. And the descendants traced to Fatima, they're known as the noble ones or as the lordly ones. And of course, they still exist today. So, after the attack upon Ali's house, and after Ali accepts Abu Bakr as the successor, as the caliph, and he does so in order to maintain unity of the community, that is, unity of the Muslim community, he withdraws. He essentially withdraws he doesn't participate in any of the wars. He doesn't participate in any sort of political position. He does sometimes serve as an advisor, but he largely spends the next 24 years focusing on his family and helping people in Medina dig wells, plant trees, etc., etc. But notice once again, this angry division begins between the Sunni and the Shia immediately with the death of Muhammad. But the Muslim community, or the Muslim alliance, also fractures in another fashion. Many of the tribes that Muhammad had brought together revolt against Abu Bakr. They refuse to pay allegiance to him or any of the other what are known as the companions of Muhammad, because they said, we only submitted to Muhammad. We only submitted to Muhammad. And now that he is dead, our allegiance is dead as well. Now, this doesn't exactly sound like a religious conversion experience, does it? In other words, the reason why I mention this is because, once again, the religion of the ruler is the religion of the people. The ruler dies, you can reconsider. Abu Bakr, however, emphasizes that no, 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 no. You joined a community. That community still exists, and I am still your head. Was this convincing? No. But the military force he was able to assemble was convincing. And so he puts down this rebellion. In other words, to bring these tribes back under control requires war and it requires subjugation. But he does, with his armies, reunify this Arabian world once more. But once these rebellions are put down, wars of conquest begin. And why would that be the case? Well, he controls a region. That region has borders. Borders are fragile. Borders need to be strengthened. Borders need to be expanded. And so, to secure the borders of this Islamic state, the various tribes begin to move beyond the Arabian world. In other words, as I mentioned to you last week, when Muhammad preaches to the Muslims that we are all brothers and you cannot steal from each other, which, by the way, by implication means you also can't kill them, the question is, well, where does all that ferocious energy go? Where does all that, for all of these many, many centuries, the tremendous energy of these Bedouin tribes had basically been spent in the fighting against each other all the time. You know, families against families, clans against clans, tribes against tribes. And now it's all come to a stop. Where does that tremendous energy go? And the answer is it now explodes out. You see, it explodes out into the world beyond, which creates a series, not just one, but a series of catastrophes for the neighbors of this Arabian world. That is, invasions against the Sassanid dynasty on the one hand, and the Byzantine Eastern Roman Empire on the other. Now, fortunately, these two empires are fresh, they're strong, they haven't had a war in years, and they're ready to take on these Arabs, right? No, these two empires are at their wits. I mean, they're exhausted, they're destroyed, they're reeling, they are virtually bankrupt, do you see? And this is the moment. This is the moment when these tribes begin to invade. One of the most important leaders is a man by the name of Khalid. Khalid, too, is what was called a companion, in other words, a close advisor and friend of Muhammad. And he is the one that leads the Bedouin armies into the Sassanid Empire. One of the, generally in a war, you have infantry, that's the soldier guys. They're the ones that you pick off immediately. And then there's the cavalry. They run a little bit faster, or they drive the tanks. Well, the difference with the Bedouin armies is that the infantry is actually cavalry. Do you see? In other words, the Bedouin warriors are on camels, and camels actually can run pretty fast. And so, in other words, what Khalid does is he's very aware of the tremendous mobility of his forces. Historians estimate that initially his force was about 35,000 Bedouin warriors, which actually, that is kind of scary. I mean, that's a really considerable force. And again, they really smash into these Sassanid regions, as you can see here on this map. You see, again, the red arrows moving up out of the areas of the great deserts, again, moving up towards the north into the border regions of the Sassanid Empire. Again, a brilliant general. Within a year, he has captured a large part of the Mesopotamian world, and he begins to lay siege to that great capital city, Ctesiphon. Then Abu Bakr, again, who's encouraged this and directed it in part. Abu Bakr, by the way, does not participate. For obvious reasons, he's an old man. But Abu Bakr then sends him off towards Syria, and within a half a year, much of Syria has fallen to his armies as well, and they lay siege to the city of Damascus. At this particular point, I need to mention the following. To us, many of these cities have perhaps an exotic sort of quality to them, at least as far as the name is concerned. But it's important to understand that the way Damascus sees itself is that it is the oldest city in the world. So once again, there's this tremendous gravity to this city. It has tremendous prestige, and it is now laid siege to by these Bedouin Arabic armies under Khalid. Abu Bakr hears about the siege, but he actually never lives long enough to find out whether it succeeded. Because he himself, already an aged man, becomes very, very sick, he believes that he's going to die, and he does. He believes he's going to die, and so he decides that he should name a successor to avoid the kind of chaos that happened after the death of Muhammad. And so he appoints Umar as the next caliph, the next successor, because he's the next oldest, and he's the next closest again to Muhammad. So again, Abu Bakr proclaims Umar as the successor, and Abu Bakr dies shortly after Damascus has fallen to these Arab Bedouin armies. Again, Abu Bakr is in Medina, because Medina is the capital of this Muslim community, and he is buried next to Muhammad. So if you were to go to Medina, you would see him there. Notice that he's only ruled for 2 years. Okay. Next comes Umar, and Umar now leads the armies that lay siege to the city of Ctesiphon, again, this great capital city of the disintegrating Sassanid dynasty. Again, the Sassanid ruler is a boy, and he and his advisors flee the city because they know the city is going to fall. They forget, I don't know how they do this. It must have just been literally a panicked departure, because they leave behind the treasury. That's really unusual. You know, a lot of people will just stuff it in their pockets and try to take as much as they can. At any rate, they leave behind the treasury, and so the result is that when Ctesiphon, this powerful city, falls to the Muslims, the tremendous treasury, of course, falls to them as well. This is a huge, huge windfall for these invading armies. So, what this region now is called is the Caliphate. You see? In other words, it's the region that is controlled by the successors. Therefore, it's called the Caliphate. You've heard this term many times before in recent periods, and the word Caliphate ultimately gets more and more textured meanings. Yes, Rachel, go ahead. He's helping. Okay, what is Ali doing during this time? He's helping to dig wells in Medina. He is remarkably unparticipatory. This is very, very interesting. He's very, I personally suspect the reason why Ali is not assisting is this is his quiet opposition for not being selected. You see, for not being selected. Because again, the selection of Umar takes him by surprise, and gradually, reluctantly, he also ascends to this, once again, for the unity of the community, for the unity of the Muslim community. So, within just 5 years, the entire Sassanid Empire falls to the Muslims. Again, it is so wrecked that it falls very, very swiftly. But many Persian cities and many cities in Mesopotamia do not give up so easily. In other words, even though the Sassanid government has basically disintegrated and ceased to exist, there are many cities that refuse to surrender. For example, the city of Isfahan. You'll see it up here, a red arrow, an arrow moving to the right, and above the red arrow to the right again is Isfahan. Isfahan resists again and again. It is sacked 3 times by these Muslim armies. In the process of this conquest, there's tremendous destruction. For example, again, you will see it on your handout, on the timeline, the greatest library of the Persians, the Academy of Gundishapur, near Ctesiphon, this tremendous library, is burned and destroyed. Most of the Sassanid records and most of their literature goes up in flames with it. This is one of the reasons why there's so many things we do not know about this dynasty, is because it is destroyed in the process of the destruction of this academy. Yes, go ahead. Yes, you will see there's a red arrow going up to Kufa, and above Kufa there's a very large dart. That's to the right of it is Ctesiphon. Do you see it? Again, it's on the Tigris River. Again, remember there are two rivers in this area, the Euphrates and the Tigris. It's on the Tigris River, and this academy again is just to the north. Again, in the process of this conquest, many palaces are destroyed, many cities are destroyed, bridges are ruined, and of course many of the great imperial gardens for which the Sassanids were famous were also destroyed as well. Then Khalid ibn al-Wadi, of course, who had been so decisive in the conquest of Syria, popularly called the Sword of Allah. Is that interesting? I should probably just intersperse this at this particular moment, that this is sort of like a revolution. In other words, here's a culture that is breaking out of its bounds. Again, this Arabic culture, breaking out of its bounds. And the result is that people who have tremendous abilities can suddenly really thrive. In an ordinary society where everything is structured, talent is easily suffocated. But again, with this tremendous expansion, people like Khalid, for example, who probably would never have been able to achieve very much in a small tribe, literally now can use all this boldness and brilliance which he clearly possessed, again, to bring about these tremendous military triumphs. Yes. It was actually in Syria. Syria, it was primarily Christian, but different types of Christians. In the Sassanid Empire, very, very many different religions. Zoroastrianism, of course, very important. Manichaeism, also very important at this time. But again, much more multi-religious, the Sassanid Empire, than Syria. At any rate, and now Khalid, the Sword of Allah, at the zenith of his career, having captured Damascus, this ancient and very powerful and very, very prestigious city, is suddenly dismissed from his office, is suddenly dismissed from all military activities by the Caliph Umar. I wonder why. You know, if you have a really brilliant general and you're the president, that's sometimes a little awkward, right? So the reputed reason, actually there are several different reasons. My personal favorite is that Khalid, again, and you have to keep in mind, this kind of generalship is a very active generalship. In other words, he's leading his troops into battle, and he's directing strategy at the same time. In other words, he's been wounded a lot. And one of the ways that you can soothe your aching body is with, apparently at this time, a little medicine which includes alcohol in it. You put it in the bath, and as many of you know, alcohol does have some soothing qualities to it, right? And so he would get into this bath, it's a joke. He would get into the bath, and again, this alcohol would sort of help to heal and soften, again, all of the pain that he has. Well, one of Umar's spies, and Umar had many spies, reported this to Umar, and Umar then had Khalid come to him and give an accounting of his passion for alcohol. And Khalid replied in modern 21st century American translations, "Don't you think this has taken the whole alcohol thing a little bit too far? Didn't drink it, just bathed in it." That's one story. The other story is that Khalid was accused of a misappropriation of funds, which makes even less sense actually for a military leader but at any rate. So eventually the controversy of his dismissal is so great that the Caliph Omar publicly announces, "I have not dismissed Khalid because of my anger or because of dishonesty on his part, but because people glorified him and were thereby misled. I feared that people would rely on him. I want the people to know that it is Allah who gives us victory. Okay. Khalid died just 4 years later. And to his great chagrin, he was dying in bed, which for a warrior is so embarrassing. It really is, all right? Because he wanted to die on the battlefield. Exactly, very good, all right? And so he says, we have his last words. His last words are, "I fought so many battles seeking martyrdom that there is no place on my body that does not have scars from a spear, a sword, or a dagger. And yet here I am, dying in bed like an old camel." Fortunately, he had a wonderful wife. No, seriously. Because who would better know how to console a dying warrior than his wife? And she says to him, "You were given the title Sword of Allah. The sword of Allah is not meant to be broken. Your destiny is not to be a martyr. Your destiny is to die victorious as a conqueror at peace." Seriously, you gotta love women. You gotta love women, all right? Okay. And so, according to the stories, Khalid died in peace. Under Umar, the armies of the Bedouin Muslims begin to expand even further. They literally smash into the Holy Land. They capture Jerusalem, Bethlehem, Nazareth. Again, for the Christians as well as for the Jews, again, a tremendous catastrophe. These areas, again, the Holy Land, captured by the Muslims. They also captured the other caravan cities, cities like Antioch, tremendous destruction in the city of Antioch. The city of Palmyra, tremendous destructions here as well. Next catastrophe, these Muslim armies now invade Egypt. They attack the city of Alexandria, this great Hellenistic Byzantine city of Alexandria, the home not only of tremendous science and great technology, but also one of the main centers of the Byzantine fleet. And as a result of the desperate battles over the city, much of the city goes up in flames. And the city, of course, also has one of the most famous buildings in the world, the Library of Alexandria. It is said, this is hard to prove, it is said that the Bedouin armies took out all the scrolls and the books and used them in their campfires at night to keep warm. But again, this library is completely and utterly destroyed. These are catastrophic losses for the Byzantine Empire. 2/3 of the empire is lost to Islam in just a couple years. In other words, we have here the tremendous transformation of this Islamic state from a local Arab Bedouin tribal alliance to the beginnings of a world empire, and just in a few years. Again, these tribes, these Bedouin Arab tribes, move into other areas, convert or ally with other nomadic tribes, and then again together they attack these cities. In other words, faith creates the unity. The sword spreads the faith, and the sword provides new living space and new plunder. All right. One other key feature of these Bedouin armies, which made them so powerful, is they often stayed very close to the deserts. In other words, they would make an attack, and then if the attack did not go well, they would fall back towards the edges of the desert, because neither the Sassanid armies nor the Byzantine armies dared to go into the desert. And the Bedouins, of course, did, because this is where they were at home. So again, this was one of the great advantages, one of several great advantages of these Bedouin Islamic armies. And at this point, I should also intersperse that Muhammad had been actually very specific about war, and Abu Bakr had confirmed this. They emphasized, first of all, that fighting is legitimate only in A, self-defense, B, to assist other Muslims, and third, if a treaty is broken. Once those circumstances no longer exist, the war must end. It seems very clear-cut, and I do believe that Muhammad meant it in a very clear-cut fashion. But you know, we, being humans, we know how to make those terms very flexible. But Muhammad had also emphasized there are certain things you cannot do. And Abu Bakr reiterated these as well. And so I'm just going to read this for you. Again, Abu Bakr, the 10 rules for the Rashidun, that is the righteous army. Stop, O people, that I may give you 10 rules for your guidance in the battlefield. Do not commit treachery. Do not deviate from the right path. Do not mutilate dead bodies. This, by the way, was a very common practice. Do not kill a child. Do not kill a woman. Do not kill an old man. Bring no harm to trees. Do not burn them, especially if they are fruit-bearing trees. Do not slay an enemy's flock, except for food. And you are likely to pass by people who have devoted their lives to monastic services. Leave them alone. It's interesting, isn't it? So Umar, a very tall man, he towered over others when he walked through a crowd, towered over others when he walked through the marketplace, and he towered over others in abilities. Again, an absolutely remarkable man. He not only loved poetry, he loved oratory. He was a tremendous orator and a very gifted arbitrator. When he was chosen by Abu Bakr, people grumbled because he was not very popular. And yet, this succession was one of the smoothest in this early Muslim world. Again, his armies conquered the rest of the Sassanid Empire and 2/3 of the Byzantine Empire. It is said that his armies captured 36,000 cities. Maybe it just means a lot, also a possibility, okay? And that he built 1,400 mosques in the conquered lands. But what he also did is he built a very, very rational, very effective administrative governmental system that would hold together this Muslim caliphate. He was considered to be the just one. In other words, that he was the first great Muslim jurist, the one who knows how to distinguish between right and wrong. He had, for example, a very strict code of conduct for governors and for government officials. For example, he required all governors and all high government officials to make a pilgrimage to Mecca once a year. Not just because it's good for their soul, but because then he allowed people to tell the officials what was wrong. And in this way, the officials would know what people were thinking and what kind of mood the people had. In other words, they knew what the complaints of the people were. To minimize the chances of corruption, he paid his governors very high salaries, and they could only be in office for 2 years before they were moved, so they couldn't create power bases. He created a very elaborate espionage system to spy on the government, to make sure that it followed the straight and narrow. I have this really strong urge to make a comment, and I'm not going to make it. And anyway, so he says, for example, again, he addresses his governors. He addresses again these government officials. He says, remember, I have not appointed you as commanders and tyrants over the people. I have sent you as leaders instead, so that the people may follow your example. Give the Muslims their rights. Do not beat them. Do not beat them, so they will become intimidated and cowed. Do not praise them too much, lest they fall into the error of conceit. Do not keep your doors shut in their faces, lest the more powerful eat the weaker ones. And do not behave as if you were superior, for that is tyranny. His justice against his governors was swift and it was harsh. But he also established a system of charity to provide the poor, the needy, widows, orphaned, the disabled, whether they were Muslim or non-Muslim, to provide them with basic needs. He would, for example, again, this is one of the traditions that is established. It says that he, the second caliph, did not cut off the hands of thieves, because he said, if someone is stealing, it means I have not provided them with a livelihood to make their lives complete. Isn't that interesting? And he said, again, one of the sayings that is attributed to him is, if a dog dies hungry on the banks of the river Euphrates, Umar will be responsible for not doing his duty. Again, this is a very, very interesting man. He tolerated other beliefs. No one was forced to convert to Islam. Submission to authority, yes, but not to the religion. He lowered taxes, and he was known for his very austere lifestyle. He spurned all the pomp and luxury which was so common for any ordinary monarch, like the Sassanids or the Byzantines. And he would walk the streets of Medina during the day with a whip. People said, or it was said, that they feared his whip more than any sword. And he would also walk the streets of Medina at night to make sure that no one slept hungry in the city. He had 9 wives, 14 children, and after 10 years of brilliant rule, he was assassinated during his morning prayers in Medina by a Persian who stabbed him 6 times in the stomach, and then as the assassin tried to get away, slashed 12 more people, most of whom died, before the assassin then committed suicide. Umar lay dying for 3 days, long enough to assemble a council to decide who the next caliph would be. And, well, who is in the running? Well, there's Ali, and he's actually a member of the council. And he is very much hoping that now, no, not going to happen. No, because they pick somebody else. Yep, Mr. Uthman. Oh, darn! Mr. Uthman instead. Ali is not chosen as again. And so once again it is said that Ali accepts this because he wants to maintain the unity. There are 2 important elements to Mr. Uthman. Again, this is just going to be a little brief summation. The first is, in one of the battles that had occurred, a significant number of Muslims are killed. Significant because these were men who were the memorizers. They were the ones who knew some of these original recitations from Muhammad. And so Uthman decided that now is the time to assemble an authoritative version of the recitations. Yes. And so there have been a number of scribes, but one of the most important scribes was Ali. Muhammad had already in his lifetime told Ali to keep a running record. So Ali was one of the scribes. So Uthman, he rules for 12 years. Uthman begins to have scholars assemble these various scripts of Muhammad's sayings. There are some variations. That's to be expected of these various copies. And Ali's is quite different, which is also interesting. So Uthman and his men choose one copy and they destroy all the others. Uthman under his reign, Uthman is a member of the Umayyad clan. Again, under his reign, North Africa is invaded. Again, you can see here, the caliphate again begins to expand even more. And so as a conclusion for today, the caliphate, this vastly expanding, swiftly expanding empire, what is its religion? Islam. That's hopefully not a surprise. Then its language is Arabic. And its ruling class is Bedouin warriors. This again is very, very important. It's all done in the name of the jihad, that is, the holy war. Because, again, Muhammad had said, fight in the name of Allah against those who fight against you. Nothing ruins like success. Because after 12 years of rule, Uthman is assassinated as well. Notice, so far, of 3 caliphs, only one, the first, Abu Bakr, has died a natural death. The next 2, Umar and Uthman, are both assassinated. And now, who becomes caliph? Ali! It's not a happy time, because here comes the battle of the camel. What? See you next week. Thank you.